Now listen, if you're the kind of person who thinks adding Coke to a 15-year-old single malt is acceptable, you might just be the reason this podcast exists. Welcome to the Non-Chill Filtered Podcast, where we unpack whiskey like it's emotional baggage.
What's up, guys? Jez here from Non-Chill Filtered, and welcome back to another episode. This week, I am graced with the beautiful presence of Owen. Owen, sir, how are you today?
Good, mate. Good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good. Do you know what? Happy to be drinking whiskey at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Gotta make it work. We're both early workers, so I feel like it's the after work time, anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we've been up since crazy hours of the morning. Both got the gym workouts in today, so we ticked all those boxes. Yep. It's like, treat yourself. Earn your bourbon, absolutely, if you will.
Absolutely.
Earn your bourbon. So how did you become the go-to guy for bourbon in Australia? Well, aged whiskey in Australia, because you were the go-to guy at AWA. We'll touch on your origin story, actually, because
for sure. So I'm 25, so I'm probably one of the younger people in this industry to have that kind of depth of knowledge. But it comes about 16, 17, 18. My dad was putting whiskeys in front of me and saying, try these, understand why you like these, why you don't like these, and it took me quite a few years of sort of going, that's awful, who likes whiskey, to, oh wow, this thing that's in front of me is actually really interesting. And then come end of 2020, start of 2021, as we head to COVID, there's a shop in Melbourne called Casa de Vinos, run by Jose. Though they specialize in old and rare whiskey, and they needed some hands to fill sample bottles essentially during COVID. So I headed down there as a sort of, well, I'm not doing anything on my sort of gap year / sort of first year of uni. We're all working from home. I'll go and get a job, go and make some money in the process. And basically we were decanting full-size bottles into little miniatures, send them out, doing virtual tastings online, as was the trend for the COVID era that everyone had to put up with. And over the time, I think we were doing 3 tastings of 4 or 5 whiskeys a week for, I think I was there 8-9 months, maybe even a year. So it was just this blasting quick-fire knowledge of, this is what a Tomatin at 25-year-old tastes like. This is what a Glenglassaugh and Sherry tastes like. This is what old bourbon tastes like. It was just a hyper education within a very short period of time. And I got to the end of about a year, I think, with Casa de Vinos, and was sort of looking for something new. And I'd really found a love of old vintage whiskey through the tastings we'd done. And Sean at AWA, Australian Whiskey Auctions, was looking for an extra pair of hands. So I came on to AWA. I think it'd only been running about 6 or 7 months, but it was a cool new opportunity. And I went with Sean almost 3 years, and my experience at the auction house is essentially what formed my familiarity and my expertise with bottles themselves. So I saw so much come through the auction house, new and old. I learned all about those old stories, those new stories, learned how to authenticate bottles, tons of seals, tons of different paper labels and those kind of things, and got a good familiarity with what the physical bottles are doing. And it kind of spiraled. Sean was great. He gave me a lot of space to learn about those bottles. So when we had an old Johnny Walker come in from the 60s, it was my job to date that, authenticate that, understand the story around it, what could be in the blend, what is different today. And just working for an auction house, it's my day job, where a lot of people with whiskey, it's their hobby. They like to spend time learning about it. For me, it was a passion that was happening every day. And then come October, I believe, last year, I moved over to a company called Baxus. Baxus is an American company. It's a combination of the crypto space and the whiskey space. We have kind of somewhat similar to an auction house. It works as a little bit of a hybrid out of New York, New Jersey. We vault bottles, so just like an auction house, people send bottles over to us and we hold them. We do 360 scans of them, and then they can put them up on our marketplace for sale. And that's all powered by blockchain, so every bottle has an individual chain asset ID. And these range from, I believe the oldest thing we have in the vault is from 1770, a Madeira from literally the 1700s, pre-Civil War whiskeys, I believe, are in there as well. Absolutely crazy old stuff, all the way up to the high-end Macallans from the 1920s and everything. So there's kind of the full spectrum of whiskey kicking around there. But it sort of, my origin started as just filling sample bottles in a whiskey shop and being exposed to this industry and these types of whiskeys, to just within 3 or 4 years, diving headfirst into the literature, the bottles, the history, the books, anything I could find on old interesting whiskey. Yeah.
You've truly become like a whiskey sponge here and just like soaked up as much information as you possibly could.
That's the thing with this industry. You think you know everything, or you think you know the whole story, and then someone will pull up some piece of information or archived history, and you go, "Wait a minute, that no one knew about that until now. It's 100 years since that happened." So you never know everything. And I've worked my way through the different categories little by little. I kind of say that at the moment, for example, I'm not particularly proficient in cognac and brandies and that kind of thing, but at some point I would just throw myself into that, and I will buy nothing but cognac and brandies, and I will read nothing but those books. Same way I have done with rum, same way I did with American whiskey versus Scotch whiskey. You just sort of, it's why I refer to my role and similar roles that folks have at auction houses, spirit specialists. We like to be that broad spectrum of that we cover everything. But these are very large industries with huge history, and everything has its own unique niches and communities. So we sort of tackle, I've been finding that I tackle them one at a time. So I know my rums, I know my American history, I know my bourbon and my Scotch whiskies very, very well. I know my Australian very, very well. But yeah, it's just a fun experience.
Well, it sounds like a fun place to start. Our little journey here, you graced me with a shitload of samples, and I'm like, look, let me pay you for some samples, send them up to me. And
No.
like, you sent me to like almost a pallet worth. There was, I saw the bag turn up. I'm like, it's freaking this big.
And I kept having to go up a size in Ozpost about 3 times when I was getting the mailing bag. And I was like, surely that'll fit. Oh no, go up one more. It's part of the hobby, right? Everyone wants to share. That's why the bottles you can see in front of me are open. They've been used for tastings here in Melbourne. They've been taken over to the States and shared with folks as well. It's great to talk about bottles and write the history, but it's just as important to be drinking them and learning about these things. So great example is this old Overholt in front of me. So before I headed away on my last US trip about a month ago, I did a tasting at Goodwater down here in Melbourne, and we cracked a whole bunch of closed distilleries. I wanted to focus exclusively on closed distilleries, and mainly the national distillers' closed distilleries. And I found this 1981 vintage, so this was bottled in 81, Old Overholt. And Overholt was a brand that really, I love the story behind it. It's really interesting, but is kind of a mystery from about the 1950s onwards. So there's this large gap in period of time where Overholt closed their distillery in 1953, Broadford closed, and they were still bottling Pennsylvania distilled rye up until Jim Beam acquired National in 1987. So there's this almost 35-year gap where I asked everybody in the vintage whiskey industry and anybody who may collect these things, where did this whiskey come from? And nobody could give me a solid answer. So it was a moment when I saw it pop up in auction of, I need to know what kind of whiskey Overholt was producing in this era, potentially sourced. We cracked it at the tasting, gave it a taste, and just like that, I went, that's a Michter's product. That's Michter's rye, without a doubt, because it had that same unique distillate note that is intangible until you've tried old school Michter's. And I believe you'll have tried it as well. Kia from Honey Barrel sent us some samples of that hex bottle, and I was also privileged enough on my last trip to try the Hirsch Blue Wax, the 1974, these crazy old vintage whiskey. All three of these whiskeys had this same distillate note. So yeah, I would put my money on it being a Michter's product, a Penco product of that era. And I now get to, having opened this bottle, I now get to talk about it in my tastings, and I get to write about that and say, never going to be 100% accurate. No one's ever going to know, but here's my theories on the story, and here's my lived experience on where I think this whiskey comes from.
It's only because you've touched on so many different bottles, right? And it's
pretty much,
able to encapsulate all that knowledge.
Yeah, it's that point of difference of trying different eras. So I'm so privileged. Again, there's a group of folks in kind of New York and Ohio and Kentucky called the Vintage Whiskey Society folks. So I actually went out to Missouri, for a tasting with them, and they opened stunning bottles. I believe we tried a rye from 1881, 19-year-old rye in this tasting. But I was privileged to try an Overholt from 1911, and it was just fundamentally an entirely different spirit. It was made at a different distillery. It was produced in a whole different way, whereas this was maybe a little bit lighter and fruitier. That 1911 was like brioche bread. It was a wild style of rye. But it is exactly that. I don't have those opinions until you try those whiskeys. So it's why sometimes I look at my bank balance as a 25-year-old and go, what am I doing here? But I have to remember that I I've purchased drams that are often once in a lifetime experiences that add to that knowledge base, and almost I always call it a jigsaw puzzle. The jigsaw puzzle is never going to be complete, but it's another piece in the puzzle to get an idea of the wide spectrum of whiskey, how it tastes, and how that informs both my writings and my authentication experience, and kind of adds to me, to my value as someone in a whiskey business.
Yeah, it's that. Yeah, you're right. That jigsaw is never. I was just thinking about it as you're talking about it. I'm like, no, the amount of like whiskeys we've tried, and like you are on another level to me. Like I'm just an alcoholic white boy from the hood, but the fact that you're trying all these whiskeys and you're slowly putting these different pieces together in your head, and you're like, all right, well, that distillery was producing this at this time, and it's like, yeah, that juice is very similar. It kind of goes back to that Michter's, and it's just like, yeah, okay, cool. I know where that kind of grabs from there, and this is that. But
and we can point, for example, to Old Crow as another good history piece. Old Crow today is a bean product that is quite literally on the bottom shelf. I believe when we road trip through Ohio, I saw it on the 86 proof black label for maybe $8 a handle. Like it was just nothing.
Oh,
you go back and Old Crow, there's tons of stories about why it changed. This is another one that we opened in that National Distillers tasting. And I had heard stories and rumors that Old Crow from the 60s, 70s, and 80s was very different. So I opened a 1973, and I had already tried an 80s product. And the 80s is very sort of very bland. Maybe it's still tasty, but very straightforward whiskey. Whereas this 70s bottle is way more funky. It's almost like a red wine. It has this very gungy, yeasty profile. And
interesting.
Looking at the history, there's suggestion that in kind of the late 60s, I believe, maybe early 70s, Old Crow had their yeast lost or destroyed. And yeast is such a fundamental part of the production process that you lose that or you change that, you change your entire distillate. But that's exactly the thing. I opened these and I tried these and I went, now I have a point of, if I was going to go and buy Old Crow, I would buy 70s or 60s and I would skip the 80s. But someone may find that 80s profile but more of a preference than the slightly more funky 70s. But it's why a lot of people come to me when they find these old bottles and they go, what's your opinion here? And whilst I never want to be responsible for someone's good or bad purchase, people come to me because I've had that lived experience and that lived taste experience. It's great fun. It's often very expensive. I mean, I get some wonderful deals in the process. I spend a lot of time in auctions and private sales and working it through. I'm not even on close to a level of the vintage whiskey guys opening these stunning $10,000, $15,000 bottles, but we kind of find our eras within the history and find what we like and focus on that.
Just go hard in the paint there. I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
Pretty much.
Well, you said your whiskey journey kind of started with your dad. What was his drink of choice? Because as I said, you sent me up a shitload of samples. So I'm like, we can find a pour to match that. I'm like, it's going to perfect way to kick off the journey.
He was he kind of started me with single malt scotch. So I believe
okay.
His favorite is always Highland Park. That was always his go-to, and it still is. For his 60th last year, we opened a 1964 Highland Park, so it was kind of I know a lot of those wonderful experiences, and some of the oldest vintage bottles he's acquired are stuff like 55 vintage Highland Park cask strength. So that's always been his favorite distillery that he's focused on. But he's a closed distillery collector, so his aim before he moves off the mortal coil is to own a bottle of every Scottish closed distillery, and I've tried have helped him considerably in that process over the last 3 or 4 years. It was quite interesting watching him teach me in my teens, and then through my experience in the industry, me teaching him most of the history and having that switch point of student becomes the master kind of thing, where he was coming to me for, should I acquire this at this price? Is this sensible? Like, how will this taste compared to the other one? So we're big fans of. I live vicariously through his wallet. Essentially, he will pick up Glenvores, Glen Albins, St Magdalene's, those kind of things, and always open them and share them at special times. So, whilst I can't afford a $1,500 St Maggie, I'm very privileged to be able to try them through him, and again gain that experience and know where to drink. My dad, otherwise bourbon. He loves his bourbon. He loves his American, and that was my introduction to whiskey as well. Working for an American company now almost feels like I'm coming back to my origins and my home, and talking about the thing that I fell in love with. Michter's was actually my first big love in the whiskey industry. I think the first paycheck Jose gave me at Casa de Vinos, I immediately bought a bottle of the Blue Label unblended American whiskey on the shelf. That goes straight. That was 18, 19, straight in a tumbler, easy peasy.
Yeah, I think I have a bottle behind me. Like unblended is easily my favorite Michter's core range.
It's just solid. It was. I like Michter's, and that was that. And so early into my journey, I remember going on a trip with my partner, first international trip with my partner, and 2020 we went to London, and I tried the Toasted Sour Mash, the 2019 release, and I spent all my time looking for it. I paid way too much money for it in London, but I knew nothing about whiskey. I just knew that I loved that bottle, and I drank that like nothing else. Like it was a wonderful early formative experience. And I look back on those and understand how my palate has changed from where I may have searched for those new releases, those limited offerings. I'm much more now enamored by the history and looking for something along there. I can't recommend a companion pour. I'm not sure what you have behind you because it looks like quite a bit, but yeah.
I was like, if you started with Michter's, I'm like, we can kick off with Old Overholt.
Yeah. Did I send you the Overholt? I can't remember. I sent you quite a few. I don't know what I sent you anymore.
Yeah, 81.
There you go.
Yeah, all right. That's
this.
Absolutely. I'm like, well, if you're a big Michter's guy, I'm like, well, it's a perfect starting point here. So I just like filled these sample bottles. Good Lord.
So working for the company I work for, Baxus. They're headquartered in New Jersey, but we often so I go out there and I inspect the bottles physically in the vaults. But it means I get to spend some time in Kentucky when we're down there. We have a house and an office down in Kentucky, so in the middle of Louisville, so it kind of makes everything easy. So the first trip in February, I went out to pick some barrels at Wild Turkey. We did the private barrel experience. Chose a couple of. I think we had one Camp Nelson, one Tyrone. So there'll be some sort of tasty liquid coming soon. But kind of got to grips with Kentucky on that first trip and realized how fun everyone was. And then the second trip in April. Gosh, it's been April, May. Gosh, it's been a while. I went out for the Kentucky Derby. So that was it was a once in a lifetime kind of feeling. And sitting in a box right at the finish line was amazing. Having those juleps the first time. But I stayed in Kentucky for another week and did as many distilleries as I could. So went straight over to Michter's, picked up a handfill, had that great experience, got to see the actual pot stills that essentially what we're drinking will have been made on, those original Schaefferstown, Pennsylvania pot stills. So Michter's is a very funky distillery. It realistically doesn't have much to do with its actual origin. It sort of was just a revived brand. But, it's a Kentucky whiskey, Kentucky spirit, not Pennsylvania spirit, made in probably a much better way than these were. But they're one of the few brands that I think are doing some quite good old style whiskeys. But this will be 1970, probably 1976, 1977 thereabouts, distilled. Will probably be, so there are only two distilleries that were operating in Pennsylvania at that time. Were Publica, I believe, and Penco, which is Penco's Michter's. And Publica was the one that I believe you may have seen some in Sydney from some collectors. The Barretts, the 12, 18, 20, these older 1990s bottlings. Anyways, Publica was essentially an industrial alcohol producer that also made rye. And Michter's is one of the few producers that was actually still focusing on whiskey. So some of those Publica stocks were left for quite a bit. Meant that in the 90s, I think it's possibly the Franklin Company bottled a few of those for the Japanese market, as is the common story whenever we talk about bourbon. Japan always loved that well-aged distillate, that well-aged stock, so they went over there. But Penco was kind of the source for a lot of the rye brands, the ryes that a lot of our favorite companies were bottling in the 60s, 70s, 80s. There's a wonderful quote, I believe it's from Jimmy Russell, that says, if the rye is not from Pennsylvania, the rye is not worth drinking, something along those lines, like the best rye is made in Pennsylvania. And it took that, so 70s Wild Turkey rye is Michter's, it's Penco distilled rye. And I believe it's only until the early 80s, kind of late 80s maybe, that Wild Turkey actually started making their own rye.
They shifted, yeah. And
that was 1 week a year. Like they had a single week of rye production in an entire year. So those Christmas ryes that everyone goes crazy for.
For the
is
people
there.
playing at home, then, was there a reason why they shifted from like a Pennsylvania rye back to, say, now a Kentucky rye? Like, because
Well, the
Pennsylvania
big
would.
one is that Michter's closed in, I believe, about 1985. So that's certainly a factor. But I think it was also just getting too expensive. Nobody was drinking rye post Prohibition. Unfortunately, there was a bit of canoodling in the government during the providing of licenses. And actually the owner of Old Overhaul, Andrew Mellon, was the Secretary of the Treasury during Prohibition. He owned Overholt, and he was responsible for choosing who was granted the licenses. So, yeah, there's plenty of corruption involved, but primarily he was giving them to wealthy individuals, and they just happened to be almost entirely Kentucky bourbon producers. So Prohibition pretty much killed that rye production. Very few were able to survive post-Prohibition. I believe 4 or 5 maybe that reopened, and by the 60s, I think there was only Publica and Penco left. So rye was just not produced. People just weren't drinking it. It was, you look at the 50s, 60s, 70s, people were wanting lighter whiskey, softer, more mixable, more mellow. They didn't like that hyper-industrial, that heavy, that thick style of whiskey that was quite common pre-Prohibition, primarily made in copper, primarily with long ferment, good quality grains, lower fill level. And from about the 40s and 50s onwards, you start to see everything drop to 80, 86 proof. Everything gets advertised as mellower and lighter. I believe I actually have a medley here. Yeah, a 1971 medley that literally on the label says rich and mild. Mild was a selling point for whiskey back in the day,
which is very boring.
Yeah, absolutely. But is they preferred that style of whiskey. So rye was sort of counterproductive to that style of whiskey that people were drinking back then. Is that a Wathans?
Yeah, it was just like just checking out one of my 70s bottlings, and I was like, oh.
Bourbon Supreme was produced by Continental in Peoria in Illinois. So that's Illinois.
Pekin, Illinois.
Sorry, Pekin, Illinois, not Peoria.
Yeah,
Peoria was
American
the
Distilling Company Incorporated. So, yes.
Same producer of Stillbrook.
Yep.
This brand. And same producer for Pennypacker. So both, they were one of the last remaining producers out of Illinois. Most of the distilleries in Illinois were closed.
Was that purely just from like Prohibition?
Again, same thing. Big businesses were killed. So if you weren't Kentucky or you weren't involved, Illinois was actually pre-Prohibition. Illinois was one of the biggest producers of whiskey in the country. I think it was almost 50% of the whiskey was coming out of Illinois. It was where the Whiskey Trust, the company, you have to go back a couple names, but National Distillers acquired American Medicinal Spirits Co. And American Medicinal Spirits Co. was kind of the evolution of a company called the Whiskey Trust. And the Whiskey Trust was 60 distilleries that essentially conglomerated to control the price of alcohol coming out of the US. It was organized monopoly, essentially.
Yeah.
So the Illinois was the location where a lot of that happened. I believe it's not Continental. Anyways, they lasted until about the 1970s and 1980s, and then MGP or Seagram's acquired them, and they now produce industrial alcohol only by bioethanol. So they're not producing actual aged spirit anymore. I'm almost certain Ross and Squibb still owns them. But yes, there's a lot of those unique sort of off-brand areas that are very confusing. Like, I believe we actually saw some Bourbon Supreme in Australia at one point, but it was again watered all the way down to 37%, as is unfortunate for our post-wartime ruling that never came back.
Yeah, that's always something that's upset Jacob, is that 37% ruling, and I don't understand. Well, actually, I know why we do it.
So the story. So Australian spirits history is A, undocumented, and B, not very cared about most of the time.
Yeah, so spot on.
shout out Luke here. Luke McCarthy has just written a fantastic book on the history of distilling in Victoria, which is the first time someone's really put this history to page, which I believe is just about to come out. But a lot of I feel like I'm probably one of the only people educated on a lot of the systems that we have when you look at Australian market bottles, because I've seen so many of them come through auction, and I've marked a lot of those notes down to kind of have some theories. So 37% alcohol, according to the literature that I recall, was a World War era rationing measure, essentially. So where 40% alcohol, 80 proof or 70 imperial proof back then, was the minimum, they were allowed to drop it because a lot of these spirits were coming from, Scotland, from America, from the Caribbean, from very far away to get to Australia. So the intention was that by dropping it down to 37% alcohol, we would make that stock go a little bit longer, instead of and hopefully keep people drinking or keep people buying things during the wartime. So it was a measure that at the time it was totally nothing to do with tax. Today the conversation is tax, but we had a highly advantageous tax system to domestic producers until the 1980s. We had a massive tax overhaul in the 1980s that made it way more expensive to produce domestically than it was to actually import products. So Corio, the distillery in Victoria, in Geelong, was opened in the early 20s by a company called DCL, which we know today as Diageo, essentially because it was so expensive to ship Johnny Walker all the way around the world, all the way from Scotland. Often those are actually shipped in casks. So this is why I sent you a Johnny Walker from the 60s. There's an argument to be made that vintage Johnny Walker, because it was shipped in barrels, actually has maybe another 6 months of aging on it for the Australian market than it does anywhere else. But I mean, that's a very expensive endeavor to ship around the world. So it was often seen as the premium option. So when DCL were looking for we need to make something affordable, the actual more sensible thing was to start a distillery halfway around the world than it was to keep shipping product. 1980s comes along, and we flip the script, and suddenly it's actually way cheaper to import Johnny Walker than it is to create Corio. So the distillery closes. There's no reason to keep bottling this stuff and making too much, having it be too expensive. So the 37% alcohol kind of becomes a tax conversation as we head into the 80s, where it's like, well, if we can bottle at the minimum and the tax is extremely high, let's take that extra 3% alcohol that we were otherwise going to have to pay and lose that. And it's why we see our Buffalo Trace at 40%, our Maker's Mark at 40%, our Jim Beam White at 37%, which is always controversial when you talk to an American. They go, well, that's not bourbon. You go, well, it says it on the label. Something's happened here.
It's my favorite topic at the moment, because I was having this argument with one of the Beam execs in a back office when I was in the US. And they were talking about, actually, we were sitting in old Carter's, upstairs clubhouse, just drinking with Mark Carter. And I was talking to this Beam exec, and he's like, we're moving, how you were saying they were shipping casks. These guys are shipping essentially these plastic containers full of a Canadian club. And then I was like, just explaining how important RTDs are to bogans and making sure we get our hands on them. They're all laughing at that. And I'm like, well, get a load of this Jim Beam White label. And I'm like, well, it's about $55 and it's 37%. They go, no, that's not bourbon. I'm like, well, it is, because your bourbon ruling has zero law in Australia. And they go, what do you mean? I'm like, well, once you guys put it in a container and it leaves the US at 40% and they bring it to Australia and they can drop it down to 37, they can really do whatever they want to it and still call it bourbon.
Yeah. And it happened with so many brands. Like there's Old Charter and Rebel Yell bottled in Australia in kind of the early 1990s. There's 37.2, which is Old Bernheim and some potentially Stitz at Wellerstock. That is 37.2% alcohol, which is criminal.
Yeah.
And I strongly believe, so the Gilbey's distillery in which was in Moorabbin in Victoria was actually closed in the early 70s because it became more affordable for their bottling operations. So bottling Coca-Cola, bottling Jim Beam, bottling I think Hennessy or Martell or something like that. And they stopped making whiskey because it was much more cost effective to bottle everyone else's spirits and distribute it. Now I firmly believe, because on the side of the label it says on the Beam White labels, made with imported ingredients, local ingredients. and it's 37% alcohol. Every single 80s-ish white label that I've seen bottled at that Moorabbin site has some disgusting sediment and cloudiness and gunk all through the bottle. I firmly believe either that was not filtered correctly or they were using local tap water. It is just night and day when you look at the bottles how disgustingly gunky these things are. And it was because it was bottled in Oz at extremely low proof with probably not very well regulated products. And it's one of the reasons why we don't ship things halfway around the world now and bottle them here. We only stopped that practice really in the late 80s. Johnny, it was still legal to bottle Scotch whiskey outside of Scotland until 2000. So it's kind of only technically a recent development that we've put an end to that. But 37% alcohol it's getting bottled in the US and then shipping over here, I believe, unless Beam is still bottling here. But it's
I think it's still
crazy.
being bottled here. I've probably got is it within grabbing distance? I'm trying to see if I've got I've got a weird looking Jim Beam white label. Really unfortunate. Me too. That is also the perks of having bottles nearby. All right, what have I got? This is 40%. It's actually got
interesting.
No stickers on it. That is very strange. Why does it have?
Curious.
This must have been there's literally no stickers. This must have been a cruise exclusive.
No. Oh, there is a UPC. Yeah, you're right. Probably.
This is.
I'll show you. I think I sent you some white labels. Let me.
Yeah, I've probably got a bottle of 37% white label kicking around too. This is fun podcast chat for people playing at home. This is what people care about. Jim Beam white label. Here we go. Now we're cooking. So surely they've got. Oh, good lord. Oh, actually, I've got some. I don't actually have. Oh no, I've got a Beam.
I'm quite a fan of having large format beams on hand because they're just such a fun pour and a fun comparison for most people that kind of don't understand how vintage whiskey works. So what I got in front of me, and I sent that large 100ml is this big 3 liter here, and it's a 1978 private stock. It was just one that I saw pop up in an auction that I was just confused about because the color of the liquid is so dark for a 80 proof what should be Jim Beam white, and it was privately selected. The black strip label on the front is for a private Swiss client. Yeah, the larger one.
That is dark.
Yeah, for normal Beam white label, and I've compared it to. So this, for example, here is early 1970s white label, but actually holds a 5-year age statement. I think this is kind of in 73, somewhere around that.
Yeah,
quite possibly, and then again by comparison, a late 60s green label. And this is when the green label was an 8-year-old product at 90 proof. This was essentially the premium Beam offering. This was the most special thing you could buy from them at the time, really, outside of the bottle and bonds. So the color of the big one is just really dark, and it's fun. It's interesting. It's going to go on. I'm going to take it to a whiskey show, and it'll be a really fun centerpiece on the top of an old and rare bar, or it'll head into a tasting and that kind of thing. But they're just funky old bottles, and they taste fundamentally so much better than the product we have today. And I'll give you a little rundown on why that might be, but modern bourbon has that 125 proof limit going into the barrel now. Back in the day, I believe it was basically 100 or 110 or 150. Like, it was much lower. They were maximum they were allowed to bring that into the barrel. The other conversation is wood. There's the average age of a tree today, I think, is somewhere around 40 to 60 years old if we're lucky. Most of the old growth trees that they would have been using in these in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s were 120 years old, 140 years old. So older tree, more rings. Usually the way we tell those age of those trees right means a tighter packed grain, higher concentration of vanillins, just good compounds that give whiskey flavor, which is often the reason why the combination of lower barrel entry proof, that tighter quality wood, that good quality wood, the use of non-GMO corn, so you're looking for often flavor over quantity, and more often than not, longer fermentation times. Most of these distilleries were not commercially driven, or as commercially driven as they are today. A lot less stock prices to satisfy, so they're able to either be left in barrel for a little bit longer, or admittedly they were off the shorter age statements. But this 5-year-old, for example, is perfectly fine, enjoyable tasting whiskey. It actually has like a biscuity, like a shortbread note, which is
Ooh,
nowhere near. This is
very,
actually the one that you'll have tried last year
yeah.
in that tasting with me, and
Yep.
it's just fundamentally nothing like the product that we have today. It was made with more care. It was made with more approach, more more passion behind the modern products have. A lot of it today, whiskey to me is 50% art, 50% chemistry. There's a human element in everything, and as soon as you pull that human element out, it just becomes chemistry. It's just A plus B equals this flavor profile. And
Yep.
as much as we think that works, it doesn't always, and you need that human element. And if there's going to be human introduction, a human impact on this, there's always going to be some element of art and interpretation and decision making. So
It's
yeah,
interesting how you phrase that though, because majority of these mega distilleries, like I guess my knowledge is purely just bourbon, but like going through in April, watching them do spirits runs, and you're like, this is all done by computers. Like you're just making sure the place doesn't catch on fire. Like
that's
it's
yes, that's so much the case today. It's control panels and the people are essentially managing deliveries and maybe rolling some barrels down a hill if they want something to show.
yeah,
But like it is when you're bourbon is a high volume product versus something compared to like Scotch whiskey. Rum is a high volume product. It is a short fermentation time. It is a grain that provides lots and lots of spirit. Whereas something like it's a continuous production, so you just keep feeding grain in that column still, and it'll just keep kicking out spirit. Whereas you look at something like malt whiskey, like some single malts from Scotland, it's a batch production. There often has to be a little bit more human element. Someone has to pull that stuff out the still. Someone has to come in and clean it. Someone has to often fill the fermentation tanks, the mash tuns and stuff like that. There are still hyper automated Scotch whiskey distilleries. Loch Lomond is one that I visited that I love, but is still often just called a factory. But the human element can come realistically at that end point, and it's why I think we have these rockstar master distillers that everyone goes crazy for. How much of that term is always funny because it can vary distillery to distillery, industry to industry. Like they're, as much as I love the Russells, I imagine not a lot of what they do is day-to-day blending of the 8-year, the core product. I know they'll certainly have a heavy hand in their own named products, and they'll have a heavy hand in the Master's Keeps and the 15s and the 13s and stuff, but the tight control that they have over that product is probably, it factually is considerably less than they would have had 60, 70, 80 years ago when those were smaller batches that they had to put their names to, and the company was reliant on that being good whiskey for them to maintain that viable commercial nature. So
but even if you look at the other end of the scale there, like say Angel's Envy, like Owen, just like having so much control over
absolutely
the spirits and like different finishing. Because I know you dropped into the office as well.
He was wonderful, and
he's a good egg.
It was so wonderful tasting all the different cast finishes and projects that he was working on. I think Angels is a good example of a large conglomerate distillery that is still human driven, and is still not such a large volume producer that they feel that a human element has been reductive. Owen is his limited editions, 3,000 bottles, I think, sometimes less.
Yeah, it was super limited, especially in that tequila cask.
Yes.
I'm sure you tried it.
Yes.
I was able to try some just before they were going into bottling, and they were just tidying it up, and they go, all right, try this. And then I was like, the fuck is this? He's like, yeah, it's coming out like in days. I'm like, and you haven't? He goes, no, still haven't figured out the box yet, but the whiskey's ready. Like, we'll just make it happen. I'm like,
and it's great. And those are the folks that are able to put something to their name that is maybe less market first and more flavor first.
Yeah, of course.
Whereas a lot of times that it will be, right, we need a limited product, you need to go and do something. Angels feels like maybe they've given him a little bit of space. He's kind of managed to carve his own niche. Some of the projects they're doing are amazing. The peach brandy finish that I tried there was just spectacular. And as sweet as it was, I know he's like, I've got to blend this into something more formative. And that's great fun. The story I always tell with Springbank is when you're so far the opposite end of being commercial, It's a great quote. I think it's in one of David Stirk's books. And it's talking to Frank McCarty, and he says, right, so you're bottling the Springbank 10. So, how are you blending this release? And Frank says, I go into the warehouse and I choose the barrels that are 10 years old. That's it.
Yeah, easy.
It's like we don't make enough whiskey for me to be able to blend more than what I've got that we aged for 10 years. I have to, if it's 60 sherry, 40 bourbon this year, it's because we had 60% bourbon, 60 sherry, 40 bourbon ready for this release. It's not because 60-40 was the best ratio ever for this release. And distilleries like Springbank embrace that batch culture. It creates, obviously at the end, the secondary end where I work, sometimes it creates that FOMO where it's like that batch was incredible and that batch not so great, but I know that the next batch coming could be similar or unique enough for me to trust it and want to chase it.
Well, Michter's operates
behind me. I have 100. But yeah, you're right. Michter's with their Schenks and their Bombigers could be very, very different year to year.
Yeah. They're I think their stuff is like a 20 barrel batch or something. However, they
something
sell
around
those
that 20-25 barrels,
releases.
I think.
Yeah, and it's like once again, it'd just be selecting those ones that tick those boxes. I'm sure it's not
Certainly.
Blended, whatever.
I think Michter's, the nature of bourbon is they have a lot more freedom, so they can afford to blend out those barrels. Maybe sometimes that don't work.
Yeah,
but Michter's is one of those unique brands where a lot of these distilleries are selling to the open market to brokers. I don't think I've ever seen a Shively distilled Michter's product bottled out in the open market. See a lot of Beam, a lot of Heaven Hill, a lot of obviously MGP, but yeah, I think Michter's is very, very close with their barrels. It's a lot of, they've really worked hard to be able to produce their own distillate, and they don't really want anyone else bottling it.
Well, they don't offer Michter's single barrel picks, so that's like which
has always been surprising.
Yeah,
but
because I'm sure there's demand, but it's like they can't do the cool stuff back of house if they're handing out barrels, right?
Absolutely demand. That 15-year-old charity barrel, that single barrel was unbelievable amounts of money, and that's a credit to the work that the team have put together. There's a fun connection there. Joe's business partner, Dick Newman, was one of the head operators at National Distillers in the 70s. So Joe had some absolute top tier consultation and partnership there when he was opening the distillery. So it's a thing of beauty. Anything else you want to jump in and try? Anything else I sent you that feels?
Yeah. Do you know what? I've got this private stock Beam sitting in front of me. I'm just gonna pop that.
Definitely.
I was thinking about it. I'm like, who would want 3 liters of Beam single barrel?
So it's one of those curious bottles. I don't know if it's a single barrel. I don't know if it's just a Beam white label. I don't know what it is. And whenever I've asked anybody in the vintage space, the logic has been, we think it's essentially a core bottle, but we're not certain. Similar to the Weller personalized labels. This is a 107 from 1977, but there is a number of labels out there that say personally selected for XYZ, and they were often given as gifts. They were corporate gifts for friends, for family, for company relationships. The working theory that I have is essentially this is a specially labeled, I think it's for an Italian guy, Paridi and Gianetti, and it's a Swiss import.
Yeah, you see a lot of those on the auction site. I don't know if it's that one particular company, but it was a name I was coming across fairly often.
It'll probably cost Gianvenetti or something along those lines.
Yeah.
So often, so Italy was one of the biggest markets vintage-wise for whiskey. They were buying, collecting, and drinking whiskey long before anybody else really was appreciating it. The 70s, 80s, and 90s, everyone was drinking tequila, rum, vodka, anything neutral spirits that you could mix into a daiquiri or a Sex on the Beach or something super fruity that you could taste the alcohol with. But Italy was looking for an alternative for grappa. The after dinner drink was firewater. It was this neutral brandy spirit that was often made quite rough and quite poor. So the Italians had kind of been introduced in the 70s to malt whiskey, and then that kind of spiraled into just whiskey in general. So Ballantine's was a really big seller. Glengrant, Macallan, the notorious one was that people that were looking for grappa alternatives were buying these 5-year-old vintage Glengrants. It's very few producers were bottling their whiskey at 5 years old, but Glengrant saw it as it's 5 years older than the grappa you were drinking, and it's extremely cheap. It's really affordable. It's kind of almost the same color, but it's so much better than drinking grappa.
It's an easy selling point.
Absolutely. And the consequence of that is Italy has a collecting culture. They have this wonderful culture of, there was a lot of whiskey imported to there, but there was also a lot of whiskey that was kept. A lot of whiskey that was not necessarily just collected, but people had a moment of pride of having a large amount of bottles that they could either share with people or that they could look at and tell a story with. You'll find that, for example, this overhaul is I think it's a Sofianto import. Where am I? It is a Sofiantino import from 1981. So that's an Italian import to Genova. So it was a wonderful podcast recently with Luca Gargano of Velier talking about how he started as the Ballantines and Macallan importer and all these kind of things, and how Italy changed. And the markets are dictated by the importers. You know, we don't learn new brands and drink new things without these importers pushing them forward. And he talks about how he built these brands into large case sellers because they took a risk on these new brands, and they took them out there and people tried them and loved it and watched those cases sell.
It's so funny you mention that, because we're the exact same way here, right? Like,
absolutely,
the only way we see new brands is like importers taking a risk. Like, even say Discus doing a lot of work, just bringing a lot more American whiskey brands out here and, you know, showcasing them at the whiskey show, and people are rating them, trying them, going, yeah, I like this. And look at, say, Sagamore for a great example. Like, it showed up on the whiskey show 3-4 years ago. It's now being distributed by the Whiskey List because just an overwhelming support for this rye that came out of nowhere, pretty much.
So, yes, we're ultimately beholden by the importers. Certainly from a vintage perspective. I buy a lot of my whiskey in Italy, England, Germany, Japan, some from New Zealand, but the nature of the American market is getting anything out of the States is often quite difficult unless I'm jumping back and forth, and even then it's quite expensive.
Yeah.
So I can get quite a lot of whiskey from Japan from the 80s because they were drinking it during that period of time. I can buy quite a lot of bourbon from Germany and Italy from the 60s and 70s because, again, a lot of those were exported. I have 60s Four Roses for the German market. I have a 1967 original Dant from the Gethsemane distillery that closed in 61, bottles for the Japanese market. But getting past that point is essentially nigh on impossible, because if they weren't being exported to those countries, you can't really, they're not going to turn up in those estate sales or those public auctions. So it's the same today. We are beholden to what comes into the country because that's the only way for it to appear affordably. And, we'll pivot and talk about some modern brands. I absolutely love Starlight and Peerless. Those are two of my favorite current modern distilleries.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I brought plenty back from my trip.
Nice. I saw how much you brought back. Because I saw that Double Oak Rye pop up, and I was like, I have to buy myself one of those. And even Starlight too, like just going through and doing a hand fill and tasting some weird stuff they've got sitting in the barrel is mind blowing. It's just
it's crazy.
It comes here.
So I walked into a Cambridge Wines in the middle of New Jersey and just picked up a random Starlight bottle, and I was like, oh, it's 5 years old, toasted barrel, whatever, 75 US. I mean, that's like, I think I've been home a month and a half to drink this, and we took it to a Goodwater event, and it was just everybody adored it and drained it and went, this is fantastic. And I went, if this came to Australia, this theoretically would be about $150 a bottle,
which is amazing.
It would be fantastic, but we are just beholden between whether or not Starlight feels like they want to export and whether or not we're going to have an importer that is willing to take a risk and do the harder yards on those brands.
So Starlight doesn't have the stock to send over here.
Certainly.
Like, I was talking to them and they're like, yeah, we can't. I'm sure I'll have them on soon, but they were saying they don't have the stock to distribute. I'm like, you guys will kill it here. And then doing the numbers with them, it's like, And
it's more and more of these brands are starting to look overseas. Start of the year when all the Trump tariffs are starting to kick in, a lot of people were realizing that, oh, wow, I actually really, really need to diversify. I need to be, if the US market drops out like it has done multiple times in history in the last 200 years, as the whiskey market in general is just a cyclical thing, it up and down, up and down, up and down. essentially kids rebelling against their parents in some capacity, either drinking whiskey or not drinking whiskey.
Yep.
Always flip-flops. They need to be able to find export markets that will sustain their spirit, like Japan, that was willing to take all of the old bourbon in the 80s, like Australia, which has always been happy
Jack Daniels,
having Jack Daniels and RTDs and all of these kind of much more affordable versions of brands. Like Cougar is Australian market MGP,
which is
it's bottom shelf Australian MGP, and it's been going since the early 90s.
A Cougar Black, the 45, kicking around. Like
that stuff is not great, admittedly, right? Like, great, yeah, it's not great. But the point is, MGP has had a secret. They've had a diversified export market brand for their liquid that has been solidly selling and is still one of the most affordable products for 30-something years, almost 35 years in this market. But we are then reliant on a business in Australia wanting to take the risk buying pallets of stock in a very difficult climate with an ever-increasing tax rate. And often, with the way the consumer is moving, it needs to be higher proof for it to be interesting and justify the sale. So you always use it as an example when I go overseas to the States and talk about how bad our taxes, how out of date our tax system is, and say, hey, you guys, Old Grandad 114 is really great. It's really tasty. Like, it's $30 a bottle, can be had even cheaper at $25, $22 a bottle. I said, just so you know, the amount of money you're paying for that doesn't even cover the alcohol tax and GST to get it to Australia.
Yep.
Never mind the cost to make it, the transportation costs, the retailer margin, all the overheads, everything. I was like, this is your $30 bottle would be $65, $75. It would be more than twice because of that high proof aspect. So a brand like Peerless, when I spoke to the folks down there, they said, we want to export. We're ready to. But these bottles are already quite expensive in the US market. 130, 140. Yeah, they can be. The Double Oak bourbon I purchased was $80, which was fine.
Yeah.
I think the Double Oak Riot I bought from Justin's House of Bourbon was about 135, 140 US.
Yeah, so I paid 100
They're not
in Cincinnati.
Yeah, crazy pricing.
Which
crazy
is like that is a problem in itself. Like, sort out your pricing first, because the fact that you can go to the distillery and buy it for 130. Or you can go, I don't know, an hour up the road.
The Double Oak bourbon was 120 at the distillery, and then I went to Evergreen Liquors and I paid $80.
Yeah,
which
wild.
Is supposedly it's a bureaucratic thing that they weren't even allowed to sell at the distillery. It was only going to be allowed to sell in retailers, and the compromise was that they could sell at the distillery if it was a high market cost, right?
Yeah.
As to however legitimate that is, I don't know, but that was what I was informed of.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the pricing alone. But because Peerless is bottling everything at barrel proof, 55, 60% alcohol, great, exactly, awesome, wonderful brand to get behind, doing the right things. No one's going to buy 300, 350, 400 Australian dollar Peerless.
You're spot on.
It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
I know a few of these bottles came in, I believe, with a private importer almost 6 years ago. It was pretty much just as I started working in the industry. But they were $300 and something for, at the time, 3 or 4 year old rye.
Yeah. I think it's come down tasty, now to like 220. But even then, I'm like, it's
an uphill battle, right?
Yeah. It's that price isn't getting any cheaper. Like, they've been losing money on it. I think we're talking about the same retailer here in Victoria, but they're not gonna come in. We're not gonna see Peerless.
No.
Because it's way too high.
It's a shame, because those products definitely deserve to be here. It's a product the Aussie market should be able to enjoy, but it just doesn't make economical sense for a small importer. If you look at the importers that are in Australia, there are pretty much 2 or 3 large importers, and they're mainly focused on high volume core SKUs. Dan Murphy's has branched out here and there on a few smaller importers, but 90% of the time just gives up because it just doesn't sell at the volume that they want or at the margin that they want to. And if Dan's doesn't want to bring it in, we're reliant on those smaller importers like the Whiskey List, like Castavinos, like Honey Barrel. Here, obviously doing great work trying to push those new brands. But it just becomes so prohibitively expensive. Nobody really wants to spend almost $200 Australian on Old Grandad 114, knowing full well that it's sub $30 US if you go overseas to pick it up.
So what's the trade-off here? We just get a mule to keep shipping over like cases of 114?
I think
go to every liquor store and send it
yeah,
over?
yeah, no, that's true.
Because I'm like, then it'd
I'm
land
not
at
endorsing the
$100
dodging
bucks.
of. I'm not endorsing the dodging of alcohol tax for Australian government purposes.
No. But like, even if you do it properly, like we'd have it on shelves for, I don't know,
It has to be something that you
110,
purchase
120?
directly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a retailer can't sustain those margins and sell those bottles out. It's
No,
just,
exactly.
It's not achievable. And I mean, I've been in the industry now 4 or 5 years, and that's almost 10 alcohol rises because we're every 6 months. So where I was at 5 years ago with both the margins and the nature of the tax, you could purchase bottles quite comfortably in the $100 to $120 range. Now, whenever someone says to me, I've got $100 to buy a gift for someone, that quality liquid in that area just gets squeezed. And I think there's still some good deals to be had in the American category.
Oh, yeah.
But certainly when you look to Scotch whiskies and especially higher quality Scotch whiskies, you're just priced out quickly. Interesting, maybe sub 100, start with Baker's 7. I've seen that go on sale quite a few times. That's rock solid at $80, $90 whenever it's going really cheap.
Yeah. Well, we were able to clean up
Nectar's-
at like $50 a bottle.
You got very lucky on that. I was very upset when I saw that.
Like the fact they just put them on clearance and they were just like, oh, tax. I think they do it with the tax purposes because like picking up Eagle Rares for $70 a bottle because they're like, whatever.
We're in a weird stage. Like certainly 6 to 8 months ago when I was working for the auction house, we saw it happening a lot. Importers, especially small importers, were just dumping stock across. They needed to get some cash flow through the door. So it wouldn't surprise me if either the heavy discount came directly from the importer with Beam, or if it was Dan's just saying, we need to get some stock or we need to get some people through the door. And unfortunately, the nature of obviously the Dan Murphy's is some's an app deal, some's a local clearance sale, some you have to get just delivered online. Like, I think Blanton Steak from the Barrel I saw was under $180 if you got it delivered on the app, which is bonkers because it's $200 US at Buffalo Trace now. If you're lucky enough to have it put out on the day. So there are certainly deals to be had in that process. As much as I love old whiskey, it's going to be there's a lot more new brands coming out that I think are worth mentioning.
Oh yeah, like I'll definitely take your recs, and then I've got to get you to run us through something real quick too. What do we have popping on the market at the moment? Ah, okay. I've never seen this one before. This is curious to me. So everyone playing at home that isn't watching this, Owen's just put down 4 bottles on the table. One I'm familiar with. The other 3 I have never seen. Looks like it's from one particular brand though. It's a lot of whiskey in the background. You guys should be watching this.
That's the whole collection, right?
Yes.
So,
yes, some bangers. Okay.
So NDPs are obviously a hot topic in the industry. Didn't make the whiskey, but bottled the whiskey and put it out. So some great new brands popping up. So we did some work with these guys out in Lexington called Blackwood. So Blackwood is sourcing minimum 7-year Barton, minimum 7-year MGP. So 7-year MGP for their rye, 7-year Barton for their bourbon. But where most NDPs have been bottling pretty straightforward whiskeys recently, they have specifically gone out and looked for different mash bills or different yeast profiles. And then they're finishing these in toasted barrels. So whilst these NDPs, whilst we've kind of gotten accustomed to 4-year products getting bought from someone and shoved out at quite expensive prices, there are some NDPs out there that are still looking to provide value or provide some kind of USP. So Blackwood is one that I think would be great, hopefully, through retailers like Honey Barrel that we can get through into the country. And again, shout out to Kia who's just done the new Augusta picks that they're an NDP right now, bottling Beam, Barton, and all those kind of brands and Heaven Hill. And the liquid is really good. The liquid is great. As difficult as NDPs are to get behind sometimes, when brands are pretty transparent and kind of let the liquid speak for themselves rather than screaming about come and buy this $300 product, i.e. Old Carter, Old Charter, a lot of those kind of COVID NDPs that can really bump their prices and just people would buy them. There are people starting to come back and say, right, we need to provide some value or provide something properly different in this market and do something a little bit cool. So whilst they may sound a little bit boring and 7-year, toasted barrels, this 105 at 100 US is one of the most solidly drinking, tasty MGP 95.5s that I've tried in a very long time. Again, same thing. It's been open like 3 or 4 weeks that I'd been back, and it got shared at tastings, and it was just supremely smashable. And 95.5 MGP is never going to go wrong.
No.
It's just rock solid stuff. But there are producers out there that are doing great new distillate. Holiday is kind of almost impossible to go past. The liquid is finally at a point where it's got enough age, it's got enough strength, it's got enough blending behind it that the liquid's really good. The story behind Holiday is really fun, and for me as a vintage enthusiast, it's kind of almost like a pivot. It's like a brand turning itself around. So Holiday is made by McCormick out in Missouri. McCormick, for their entire history, has made terrible whiskey, terrible, awful. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but those old Marilyn Monroe and Elvis decanters. Those are McCormick distillate.
Okay.
That's McCormick corn whiskey, Platte Valley, all that kind of stuff was McCormick's.
Yeah, Platte Valley,
product.
very familiar. Yep.
That's McCormick. So Holiday's same distillery.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And they pretty, like most of what they made in the 60s, 70s, 80s, like pretty terrible stuff. They mainly focused on making like fruit liqueurs and vodka and brandies and like neutral spirits. Just the
easy stuff.
Running a distillery to keep the money flowing, right? But it's this great story that, I think it's almost 10 years ago now that they pivoted and went, we make this great stuff. We made great stuff at one point in history. Let's turn it around. And they were clever. They were sensible. They came out with the Ben Holiday brand rather than just McCormick distillate again. And this Bourbon Law brand, for example, was one of the kind of the early big, like everyone look at this distillery. And you go into the States and you can find the Rickhouse proof and stuff. I think it's $65, $70 US. Like it's all
Banging.
rock solid. Their distillate, 6, 7, 8 year bourbons now at great prices. So they're kind of the poster boy I find that we need these kind of brands in Australia.
Yeah.
Because if the market falls out of the States, these are the people that are probably going to suffer the most. People that haven't quite fully got their beam level distribution or their kind of their reputations out there. So kind of fingers crossed, hoping that we get some more of that Holiday product, that we get to talk a little bit more about the brand here.
Can you see it be more of like a scramble at the finish line? So say the bourbon market does drop out in the US and they're like, how do we get distribution in Australia, and just reach out to everyone and
so much
cases?
of it. Sure. So much of it though is because it's whiskey's still a personal business. It's about knowing who to reach out to. I mean, we saw so many quality brands end up in Dan Murphy's and basically dead on arrival.
Which is a shame.
The MGPs, the Rossville Unions, the Remus, they are the Ezra Brooks stuff. They are all great. The Ezra 7 barrel strength is one of my favorite value whiskey,
especially
in the
on
world.
clearance. Stop it.
$85 Australian dollars is mental for how good that liquid is.
Yep.
But it's dead on the shelf. No one, it's not been in tastings. No one's gone around and talked about it. We haven't had any limited editions, no store picks. Like,
no,
it's just a volume brand, and that's fine until the brand stops selling and Dan Murphy's just drops it. Whereas if they had gone with a distributor and importer that really cared about it, they would be probably doing both the volume, and they would have a long-term sustainable customer base in this country that when that demand drops, they're still maintaining sales. So it's kind of a two-factor. You choose the one that gets you the most amount of liquid through the door and can take the biggest pallet.
So Cougars, just Cougar RTDs,
right? Seagram, you're pretty much. But that doesn't help when the market has a downturn or there's an economic issues. So it's a give and take, right? It depends on who the business is and it depends on who they reach out to. So
it's a win for us, right? Because we end up just buying it at clearance and we just leave it on the shelf.
But like we said with Dan's, it sometimes clearance doesn't end up being clearance, or it has to be done in such a rigmarole way. You actually miss out on half of this good stuff. So
yeah, that's fair. That's because I guess people are keeping it for themselves, or they're not sharing it out, or I mean, the amount of times you see, like the bakers, you go and clear the shelf because why wouldn't you? Yeah, exactly.
But by the time everyone realizes that they're clearing the shelf, it's gone.
Yeah. Like I was sending bottles left, right, and center. Like it just all right, who wants some? I'm going out for a drive, and I ended up coming back with 6, and I sent majority of them out. Like I already had a heap here.
Absolutely.
Just
Why
like,
wouldn't you?
it's like, yeah, share the love, because $50 for Bakers, it's like, even if you're going to drink that in a cocktail, who cares? It's fucking
Exactly.
50.
It's Jack Daniel's price at that point.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Cheaper than Jack, actually, but
yeah. Gosh,
it's
which is a whole
mind-blowing.
nother argument. But there you go.
But Pursuit there as
One of
well,
the other,
another banging
yeah, one of the,
brand.
and this is in the new glass as well, which is I love so much more. It was actually my big I literally said it to Kenny and his the team's
Kenny
face.
and Ryan, yeah.
I said to them on the day because I turned up on the day they changed the glass, and I said, "Wow, I really liked your whiskey, but the one thing I really hated was your branding. I'm glad you've changed that today." And they both looked at me and went, "Yeah, no, we've heard that before. Don't worry, like we've done something with it." So the raised glass and stuff's really fun, but these guys, I mean, the blending that they're doing is amazing. They evoke, in the Scotch whiskey term, stories of stuff like Gordon MacPhail, like classic blending houses that are buying from all across the country and blending something really cool and unique. It's pretty affordable, again, 60, 75, 85 US dollars for these bottles. They have a loyal fan base that they've built up very carefully over time. They care so much about the liquid. The team they've built there is wonderful. They care about their history as well. The Melwood and the Derby Town and everything that they're putting together, those labels. I actually have a couple of them, I think.
Because they hadn't released those properly. They were just up for tasting when we're at the distillery. But yeah, they're gorgeous looking bottles, and the fact that they're just dipping into, say, even Melwood, because that's the location the current warehouse is in.
Yeah, so they're on Melwood Avenue, and around the corner from the distillery was the site of the original Melwood Distillery, which was a whiskey trust distillery that was closed, I think, in the 1950s. But Melwood, so I'm very privileged, actually. We have a couple of original bottles of Melwood from like 1912 in the vaults. But the big deal is we opened a pre-prohibition pint called Gold Seal, which was distilled in 1917 at Melwood. So I tried a 13-year-old expression of the original Melwood, distilled 17, bottled 1930. We cracked that on the roof of the Penn Hotel in New York for a private tasting, and it was the second pre-pro pint I've tried that was good. A lot of them often are not in the best condition, or maybe the whiskey just tasted terrible anyways 100 years ago. But this Gold Seal was wonderful. So we linked up with Ryan and Kenny, and I sent them a sample of the Gold Seal that we opened. So we're kind of very proud that at Baxus we have sent original Melwood back to its original location, essentially, for the guys to try. So we get to have those kind of fun stories as well, and seeing the resurrected labels makes me very happy as a nerd and a geek. So,
which is exactly why I got into whiskey, right? Because like being able to acquire those bottles and then share samples with people, like it's, I guess, opening bottles that people wouldn't typically be able to find. It's like, yeah, let's share it with people.
Yes, exactly. This is it. And whilst I was never really a huge history person. I wouldn't read history textbooks and go crazy into eras. The reason why I love whiskey history is it's tactile.
Yeah.
What you've tasted, sure, it's changed in the bottle in the 40, 50, 60, sometimes 100 and something years it's existed, but it is a time capsule, and it is a representation of how that industry was at that time, how your grandparents or your great grandparents or along those lines tasted those liquids versus what they taste today. And a lot of what drives me when I'm working on these bottles for work is that I want the person that buys that bottle and opens that bottle to know every single thing about what they're drinking, and understand if they're drinking these beams from the 50s and 60s. Hey, these were probably made with non-GMO corns with a lower barrel entry proof, that they were made in this climate versus this climate. Like, this is why A plus B equals C for your thing here. And no, wow, I tried it from this era and it had this thing, and he made it this time. Like I on that vintage whiskey tasting in Missouri, we tried a Pebble Forward from 1904, which was produced at Clear Springs, which is the original. It was made by the original Jim Beam, and it was just so much fun to learn about that bottle and go, that is a whiskey from the origin name of this huge brand, and kind of bring that back to that point of learning why, who, what, why, when, where. You don't just read a textbook and learn about a person. You taste the liquid and the care and the knowledge and the history that they put into that liquid 100 and something years past when it was made. So it's just this wonderful time. History is great. You can look at an art gallery and see visually that process, but whiskey, you get to taste it and you get to compare it and you get to learn about it and you get to get a little bit drunk in the process and happier. Like it's just this wonderful loop of history, socializing with people, sharing with people, generating community. It's a hobby that really, I think, stands by itself. There's not many other hobbies like that.
No, not even close. They're going to start putting like scratch and sniff on textbooks, though. I might start paying attention.
Yes, very much
sneaking
true.
a couple of dreams in there. I'd be like, oh yeah, all right. You put that in schools, and I'd be actually willing to go back.
Yeah. I mean, I'm from a place called York in the UK, and that's notoriously where the Vikings kind of invaded or spent a lot of time. And there's a place called the Jorvik Center down there that is a recreation of the huts and stuff that the Vikings in. And you go through in this cart, and all you smell is human excrement, basically all the way through. It's designed. The whole place is a tactile reimagining of the history of that time, and all you smell is human waste, essentially, because that's what it smelled like. But it was a way more engaging way of telling the story than it was just reading about it or seeing a video or something of the kind. And whiskey's the same thing, although it tastes a lot better. So.
Yeah, it's well, actually, I've had some pretty shitty tasting whiskeys.
That's true. I've seen some drain pours from you. So.
Yeah, that's it's common around here. So you got to get rid of the bottle somehow. I'm like, stuff I can't even give away because it's just been open for so long, and the profile on it.
I've said this enough times. Like, do you need another 700ml bottle in your life? Sometimes you need to get that 700ml out the way so you can get another 700ml in that's better. Because I'd like to think we're always improving our collections in some capacity.
Spot on.
Be it looking more for vintage bottles than a new release. So, when those Bakers came out, they were at such a low price that I was after one. But I don't go out and buy $100 new release that's a core release bottle because it doesn't teach me anything.
Yeah,
I can go and try a dram of that for $10 over a bar, and I don't get stuck with another 700 mils in my house. But I'm happy to take a $300 punt on something from the 60s, 70s, or 80s that might teach me something new in the process.
Oh, spot on.
Very different style of buying compared to a lot of people, but it just is that little extra layer of knowledge and that uniqueness to it.
No, that's right. Plus, like, a good deal in bourbon is never a bad time because, like, even if it is, say, the Bakers, for example, it's like you just take it over to a mate's place and you're like, yeah, this cost me fucking nothing. You just leave it there, and
we've enjoyed the first 100 mils. You can keep it. You know?
Yeah, that's it. Because it's like you would have paid that for 3 pours at a bar anyway. So it's like, that's solid.
Definitely.
But you've got that final bottle there as well.
Yeah, this is a pick that we did with Very Old St. Nick.
That's
so
cool.
Preservation. This is kind of one of the combinations that I like to talk about of NDPs that are moving to their own spirit. So this is a Very Old St. Nick straight out of Bardstown. This is a 9-year pick that we did for Baxus with Marcy from Preservation Distillery. So for anyone that doesn't know, Very Old St. Nick was a brand that started in the 80s and 90s, basically, and was a export brand for the Japanese market. The story is supposedly, according to Clay Risen and the folks at Bourbon Law, that a Japanese customer of Marcy, so Marcy was the representative for Julian Van Winkle in the Japanese market. One of these Japanese customers was looking for a Christmas bottling, and they wanted the Japanese love Americana at that time in that bubble period, that sort of grandiose style. That's why they love KFC for Christmas and kind of this wonderful cross culture exchange. And he wanted a Christmas bottle, and what's more Americana than Kris Kringle? You know, the Santa on the bottle. And they put the brand together, and they missed the Christmas date, and it was a few months after Christmas, and Marcy basically said, do you want me to rebrand it? Like, do you want something new? And the guy said, just ship it anyways. And it was a huge hit. And this is I think it was 84 she started doing this. In the 80s, the bottles available to brokers, the barrels available to brokers at that time were genuinely phenomenal. Liquid from Medley, Yellowstone, Stitzel-Weller, Bernheim, like old barrels as well. We're talking sort of early glut era.
Yeah, because that would have been after the decanter series, and everyone just kind of moved whiskeys.
And you get into a point where they are 10, 12-year-old whiskey is pretty much like classified as young. 8-year-old whiskey is young. 12-year is sort of in the middle, and 15, 18, 20-year-old barrels were available to buy. So the Very Old St. Nick brand kind of evolved, and over the following 10, 15 years. She kept exporting it to Japan. These were sometimes 20, 25-year-old barrels at barrel proof, 114 proof, that today are worth
Mind-blowing.
multiple thousands of dollars that are stupendous. I was very lucky. I tried a 25-year-old from the 90s, one of the old backcountry, old man backcountry, something along those lines, that's reportedly sits at Weller. And whilst that wasn't a particularly phenomenal bottle, it was a very different experience to a lot of the whiskey I tried from that modern system. But what Marcy has done, she's kept that brand going, which has kind of blurred the lines a little bit on the sourcing. But we're almost certain this is a wheated bourbon to my palate from Heaven Hill. And this is one of those examples when we talk about something that's way too expensive to come into Australia, but the actual fundamental liquid speaks for itself. So these retail in the US for $400 US. So we're talking
750,
close 750, 800, maybe even close to $1,000 if in a worst case scenario for these sorts of things. But it is truly phenomenal liquid. Marcy has 40 years under her belt of sourcing genuinely phenomenal barrels, and whilst the market has dried up for those kind of options, she's still been able to secure fantastic stocks. And when we put this out as a business, I sort of said, I'm not really super happy with the price. Like, it feels very expensive. And it's, this is what they cost. This is the situation. But I was like, it's okay, but still not something I'd put my name to. And then we opened the bottle and we shared it. And I went, fuck.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a $400 US bottle. This is genuinely fantastic. It was like, essentially it was a barrel proof Old Fitz decanter. It was a
Glorious.
A Larceny barrel proof on steroids. It was just kind of that like wheated Heaven Hill profile done perfectly. And it's a bottle I'm really happy to have a drink. But she has worked really hard to mimic that flavor of some of those older barrels, whilst also working on her new distillate. So the Preservation Distillery brands are coming up now that she has exclusively done pot distillation, mostly wheated bourbon, 6, 7, 8 years old, that's coming out slowly. And whilst these brands are on the higher, more expensive side, even if the liquid is relatively young, it's one of the few that really kind of stands up and says, we know we're expensive, we know I have history, we know we're not really being super transparent in this scenario, but we have this much history. You can trust us that when you buy this liquid, you'll at least be enjoying something.
Yeah.
So the stuff that they have over there as well is just absolutely crazy. I was lucky enough to try the 17-year-old. I don't know if you know about the Ancient Cask 17 at Preservation. Tanked Stitzel Weller.
Glorious.
That she has let sit for like 15, 20 years and has created a absolutely phenomenal product that is, again, very expensive for $500 US for a half-size bottle, but stands by the fact that it was worth the wait, and this is the right way to do this kind of liquid. So yeah, some of the more premium brands that we'll probably never see in Oz, but should they appear on a bar, it's basically worth taking a punt and try that.
It's stuff I want here, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't want these bottles in the wrong hands.
That torn feeling, right? Like we don't want to encourage $400 US whiskey in our market because we can't sustain it. But we should also be able to have access to this if we want to buy it and drink it.
It's such a shame, but I'm like, I get it.
It is what it is.
But since you do have so much knowledge in buying all this old whiskey, are you able to tell the people what they should be looking out for if they're coming into this old whiskey and they want to make sure that they don't want to get stitched up? I know you put out a lot of information on AWA.
So one of the articles I think still up there is a piece of reference material on how to date Pappy Van Winkle. So that's certainly if you're buying anything in that family, I've done a whole breakdown there on laser codes and different eras of the releases and the productions to kind of understand that if you're buying a Pappy 20 from 2007, it's probably going to be Stitzel Weller juice, whereas if you buy it today, it'll be Buffalo Trace product, and kind of understand that fundamentally they're different products from different distilleries that taste very, very different there. But vintage whiskey and buying vintage whiskey it's always a gamble. You absolutely, it's just the fundamental reality of buying anything on any secondary market. You are never 100% going to be guaranteed it's real. I can spend hours, days, weeks authenticating with a microscope, looking at paper and looking for, I can spend all my time looking at a bottle and I can give you a 99% chance that it's real. But that 1% is still unknown until you crack that bottle and try it. it's this unfortunate nature of buying something from somebody else that isn't the original retailer. But what we do and the authentication we do is about limiting that chance, about reducing and
Reducing
any
that
errors
1%,
yeah, absolutely, right. And trying to understand that we've put this treasure in front of us, A plus B equals C. This little jigsaw puzzle fits together here. Here's the reasoning and logic why we think this. The most important thing when you talk about American whiskey, understand eras. So understand that prior to Prohibition, tax stamps were not a thing. They were just sealed the way that they were just big corks with big foil. Prohibition comes around with American whiskey, and everything gets concentrated. They have to have bottled and bond stamps. They have to have all these specialist green stamps, all these sorts of things. Post Prohibition, part of the deal again, tax stamps. Understanding that different tax stamps are formatted different ways. So one of the ways I can tell eras on bottles, it's probably not going to show up very well on camera, but tax stamps will have different lettering above and below depending on different eras. So the ends, for example, if the ends say 4/5 quart, it's pre-1961. If they have Bureau of ATF instead of US Internal Revenue, they're from like 77 to like 82. And like there's different formatting to understand different eras. So vintage American whiskey often has tax stamps. And then on the base of the bottles, there'll also be glass stamps. Again, I don't think that's going to show up on camera, but whatever, close enough. And on the base of this one, on the right side, it has the number 73 in the glass. That was quite a common way of producers identifying which year their glass was produced. So I know this was a 1973 bottling of Old Crow. At least the glass was manufactured in 73. Could have been bottled in 74 or otherwise. But it's that understanding the tax stamp, looking at going, right, I know that this is a 1961 to 1977 tax stamp. I know on the base it has a 73 in the glass. I know that both the stamp and the glass suggest they're in the same era. This makes sense. This is accurate. You look at other examples of the bottle. Okay, other ones that have turned up in auction, do they have the same label? Do they look the same? Do they have the same kind of seals? Or if they were different seals, is it maybe one was for a different exporter and one was for another market that had different types of seals and those kind of things? So it's being critical in everything you buy and understanding that there is always a risk. It's why I'm always looking for bargains. It's why I'm not someone that is happy to go out and spend 10 grand on a vintage whiskey bottle personally, because there is always the caveat emptor that it could be a fake. There could be a refill. That's the biggest issue we run into, is somebody buys a bottle, someone drinks that bottle, and someone refills that very easily. Someone glues a new tax stamp over the top, or someone puts a new seal and shrink wraps over it. It's kind of the problem when you enter so many of these distilleries. These are wrapped in parafilm, but this holiday is just a standard piece of tape over the top, and the pursuits are just a very cheap shrink wrap on the top of them. So the reality is that a lot of these producers are not sealing them in a particularly anti-theft, anti-fraud way. And how we negotiate that is just, we do our best. You investigate as close as you can. You look at seals, you look at labels, and you say, well, yeah, I'm 99% sure this is real. I reckon this is a genuine article, but any bottle you buy is always at your own risk, and you understand that it's a problem. Certain companies will have their own policies on this. If you open it and you find it's terrible, I find most auction houses will take it back and say, actually, that was just a terrible bottle of whiskey, you're wrong. Or, you're right, give us it back, we'll give you a refund. We should have been more aware that this was a fake. There's plenty of stories, Macallan from the mid-1800s that were opened at Swiss hotels, and it turns out it was a blend from the 1950s, something along those lines, right? We've seen plenty of those stories come out. There are some authenticators that believe it's almost 30 or 40% of all Scotch whiskey, all whiskey sold at auction is fake. I don't know if it's quite that high personally, but I know that it's a big game, certainly in the wine industry. So one of the other things, just from a quality perspective, not even from a fake perspective, is looking at consistency of liquid. So fill levels is a big important thing. If a bottle is perfectly filled and there's no issues, it's probably been stored quite well, especially if it's an old bottle. This is a wonderful example of an old granddad from 1973. The label and the tax stamp are absolutely phenomenal because it spent its entire life inside of its box. I actually had to ask the auction house to open the box because the auction house only had a photo of the box. And I said, just can you check? Can you open the box for me and check that there's actually a bottle inside? And I need to see the thing I'm buying before, rather than just buying an empty box, right? But yes, they opened the box the first time, and this thing had spent 50 years inside its box. There's no fading. It's like it came off the production line yesterday.
That's incredible.
And I was so happy when this arrived, and it was just it's vibrantly orange, which is very rare for an old granddad of this era. But consistency of the liquid is important as well. So I got stung, unfortunately. I bought this Old Tailor from 1970, a large quart. I bought it for dirt sweet fuck all, basically. I paid 50% of what the market value on it was. But I wasn't paying attention when I purchased it. The fill level was essentially down here. And I sort of didn't really pay too much attention, thinking maybe that's normal, or didn't quite catch it. Normally, the Old Tailor quarts, you can't see the liquid because they're up into the neck.
Oh.
So the liquid level was down. And again, I don't think it's going to show up on camera. But when it arrived, it was it's cloudy and orange.
I think you can see a little bit of clouding going on there.
Yeah, rather than being brown liquid, it is orange, cloudy, and gunky.
Yeah.
So the whiskey has probably spent quite a lot of time inside a hot environment or direct sunlight or been negatively affected. And it's fine. It tastes okay, but it just tastes like alcohol. It doesn't actually taste like bourbon. It just tastes very neutral. Makes it a nice fruity old fashioned, actually, but doesn't actually taste like an Old Tailor from that era should. So it's never be afraid to ask the person that you're purchasing from for more photos, more questions, more angles. Always challenge anything you see. Do a little bit of research about the history of that bottle. If it was, if it's a 70s Ballantines or something like that, understand the difference between a 70s or an 80s. Different markets change their units from like imperial to metric in different eras. So the Americans, for example, used 4/5 quarts. So on the back, it will say 4/5 quart rather than 750 ml. That was used until 1976. So bottles post 76 in the US will say 750 ml, or they'll have both the fluid ounces and the milliliters. The UK didn't change from, they were using proof and fluid ounces until 1980. Australia is a little bit contentious. There was about a 7-year allowance for beverages to change their format system. There's plenty of Australian market bottles that don't have alcohol strength on them as well. They just say fluid ounces or 1 pint fluid ounce, something along those lines. Like, it's a little bit of nicheness within those bottles, but always bid at a price that you feel, if it ends up being a fake or terrible, you feel comfortable, essentially throwing that money away, right? Like I never buy, if something is worth $400 or $500, I'll probably bid $200 or $300. And if I get it at that price, I'm happy, drink it, share it, put it in a tasting, do something with it. If I pay more than that, it creates almost a sense of like anxiety for me, where I'm like, I'm getting closer and closer to the point that if it's fake, I'm throwing a lot of money away here. So this Weller was one of those examples where I was sort of getting a little bit anxious, because I was very lucky. These are about $2,000 US.
You did so well on that one.
It was very good. I think I paid just shy of 1,500 Australian, so probably less than 700 or 800 US. So it was less than 50% of the market value of these bottles. And we shared this at cost in a tasting basically last year, which was a great way to
Goodwater
to have it, right?
Amazing,
right? But the higher that bid price went, the more I went, I'm getting closer and closer to throwing, like $1,400 down the drain potentially. Yeah. If it's a fake, or if it's bad liquid, or it's been in a hot room or something of those kinds. So we were very lucky in that scenario that ended up being good liquid, but there's always that caveat when you buy anything vintage. Just be cautious, do your own research, ask opinions. The amount of times I get tagged on Facebook, when was this from? Is it from the 70s? Is it from the 60s? Even though I don't work for AWA, I still help the guys out every so often. They'll drop me a message and say, hey, when is this from? And I'm always happy to help, because at the end of the day, people get the information, they get that knowledge. Everyone is happier.
Everyone's safer, right? Like, I guess.
Exactly. Like, and fundamentally, there's a lot of difference in value. A Lafroig 10-year-old from the 60s is worth tens of thousands of dollars than one from the early 90s. So differentiation factor both for the buyer and the seller is important. And we're in the vintage whiskey space. We all rely on each other. No one knows everything, as we've said. You're always reliant on someone else's experience that they've had. So even when I'm authenticating a number and working through a number of bottles for a collection at the moment for huge collector of vintage whiskey in the US, and there are bottles I'm looking at that I've just no idea. So I talk to him, I understand his story, where he acquired them, where he's done his research. Then I speak to other folks in the industry and other folks in the whiskey space and say, what do you know about these? Is there any brands or any history you can tell me that isn't documented online? And yeah, we have to. It's a personal industry, so we have to build those relationships and build those connections to work on it professionally.
Yeah, it's incredible. Owen, thank you so much for
Of course.
your time this afternoon. I look at the time, I'm like, fuck, I've kept you for an hour and a half. It's been talking shit.
Always.
Did you want to round out with like a little quick fire closeout just so people can understand your palate and what you really love?
Yeah, so I love vintage things. I love the old history of bottles. I love the stories of closed distilleries, the story of craft, the artistry and the history behind these bottles. And after having tried so much whiskey in those years of working in the industry, I just found that old whiskey to me tasted better than new whiskey. And the stories, the history, and the quality is that's why I chase vintage bottles and why I chase that new experience. Whilst new whiskey is fun and interesting and always great to support, my personal preference is always those older bottles. Couple of brands I love: Old Overholt, awesome history. Old Grandad, absolutely my favorite vintage whiskies ever. Old Grandad, I have gallons of vintage Old Grandad hiding, including decanters and stuff from the 50s. It's just beautiful. In fact, I will go so far as to show you that today I had a parcel arrive from eBay.
That's cool. Little cufflinks.
So these are Old Grandad vintage, original, like National Distillers issued Old Grandad cufflinks and neck pin tie that I'm wearing for my wedding next year.
That's amazing.
So I get to wear some vintage whiskey memorabilia on my wedding day with my suit. So I that's how much I love this stuff. I want it to be shared. I want it to be understood. I want people to know everything about what they're purchasing and enjoying. And I'm always happy to be a point of contact. So if someone ever has questions on things, it brings me joy letting other people know about those experiences.
Well, I have a couple of questions for you then. What is your favorite proof point?
So I'd like to say 107, but I think 101 has a special place. 8 to 12 years 101 is objectively where I found the most success in modern bourbon.
What about vintage though?
Vintage is hard. Above 86 proof is hard to acquire. Bottled and bond whiskies are actually quite rare in certainly export market, and stuff like the 107 and the 114s. Those are crazy rare, crazy expensive things. Bottled and bond. 107, I can't go past the 107s I've had in the past and the BIB. I probably say 107, and I would argue I've had two funny stories about why 107 is so popular, because it's the classic Stitzel Weller barrel entry proof is 107.
Yeah.
And Bernie Lovers from Heaven Hill told me that he asked why it was 103, 107, 110. Why was that the barrel entry proof that everyone did? He said, well, because 110 was the limit, and we wanted to go in a little under just to make sure we never went over, because we couldn't. And then the other reason I heard the story from Pappy was that he didn't go in at 100 proof. He went in at 107 because his doctor told him that he was only allowed to have two whiskeys a day. So he wanted them to be stronger, so he could have that little bit of extra alcohol.
Done.
So 107 for me is just that. I think I love the modern Weller 107 Antique. I think that's a wonderful drinker. I prefer that over full proof. The classic 107 proofs. I think that is where my palate would sit if it wasn't going to be 100 proof bottled bond.
I love it. Okay. During a whiskey apocalypse, all the bottles are gone but one.
No.
Which one are you going to be drinking for the rest of your life?
It's a hard one. I always talk this with my dad. We always talk to distillers and we say, you've got 3 bottles, your desert island whiskeys.
Yeah.
You know, what are they going to be?
Because I know we can't pick bottles on a daily basis, right? Because
absolutely. I think it's going to be this Weller. I think that's probably the one that I find the most personal connection to, because it was a great auction buy. It was shared really well. It's now my special pour. It's going to be poured on my wedding. You know, I've got a little private selection of bottles that I'm putting aside for my wedding day to pour to have after the event. Otherwise, I was very privileged. I got to try a barrel sample of a whiskey from 1824 whilst I was overseas. A 21-year-old malted rye whiskey. 1824 vintage bottled. 21 years
Mind-blowing.
later.
The
It was
fact that
stunning. I'm not allowed to talk about it online. That was part of the negotiation. But yeah, we tried whiskey from 1821, 1836, 1876. Tried an 80-year-old American whiskey from that same producer as well, 80 years in a barrel. Those if I could bottle those, probably that 1824 or the 1836, one of those two was particularly amazing. It was like a very, very old cognac in terms of quality.
Yeah, yum.
So that just for the wow factor of whiskey apocalypse. But
All the bottles just to drink.
Yes, otherwise, I think if you talk Scotch whiskey, probably some pre-warrant Lafroig. Some
way too smoky
50s.
for me, but I can appreciate it.
We got to get you pre-warrant. It's like lye cheese and smoke.
Ooh, okay.
Yes. Hyper fruity 70s, 80s pre-warrant laugh. Those are the real. That's actually one of my other like wedding day pours is a mid 80s 10-year-old half bottle that again I purchased for $150 in auction, which was absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things. So that goes on my wedding. That was my little private section for my wedding day. But yeah, those are the two bottles that I've found the most personal connection to in my collection over time.
Yeah,
probably the ones I would take on a desert island or on a whiskey apocalypse would be the 107 and a pre-warrant Lafroig.
All right, and my final wrap-up question for you: if you could share a dram with any historical figure, who would it be?
So there's too many to narrow it down because I've read about so many wonderful characters in history.
Yeah,
but I would love to pick the brain and sit there with the original Colonel Taylor and hear his story because we're working on this with Baxus, but he has a wonderful 6-page editorial on how whiskey everywhere in the world is shit unless it's made in Kentucky.
Agreed.
How American bourbon is superior to Scotch whiskey and superior to brandy and superior to Irish whiskey. And truthfully, when I read some of his writings, I went, oh, actually, he's quite correct in a lot of this assessment here at the time of where the industry was. So I think, and his story is incredible of being the custodian of another person's distillery, building his own distillery, having his son build a distillery, losing everything, and then slowly reviving it. And look at the impact that his name has still 150 years later. That he was not a particularly nice person. A lot of problematic situations in his history, but I think it would just be amazing to sit with him and talk about where he thought the industry would go and where it had been, and see what he would think of where his name is today, being such a sought after product.
That is a round table I'd love to be on. Absolutely.
Otherwise, it would be Bessie Williamson from Lafroig, who was the first female distillery owner, and she ran Lafroig in the 50s. And I think hearing her stories of going from a typewritist, working on Isla supposedly for 2 or 3 months, and ending up being this legendary distillery owner who pioneered women in distilling and created truly some of the best Scotch whiskies in history would be pretty special. So those are probably the two I'd want to sit with.
Two absolute legends as well. Like, I'm not much of a Scotch guy, but I'm like, yeah, I can definitely get behind that. It's just like a rags to riches story. Like, there's no way I could be like a typist and then end up just running a company.
That's it.
Completely mind-blowing. I've got to get my name down for this wedding though, or at least get a virtual tasting going on all these samples you're pulling for.
I'm actually getting married at a distillery in Gippsland.
That's beautiful. Do you know what? That screams you.
It does. My a distillery opened in the hometown of my partner, where he's from.
Yeah.
So I'm actually getting, like, it was genuinely made to be. And people run around looking for vintage bottles with like dates, like Blantons and stuff with specific dump dates of their days. I'm gonna fill a barrel of rum on the day I get married, so I can manufacture a bottle with my wedding date on it. So I'm we're working towards it.
That is, because it has to be, right? Like, you're just like, that's going to be our fill date, and it's like,
that's it. We're going to get a 50-liter bourbon cask, something along those lines. Fill it up with rum that we make there on the day, or a couple of days earlier, and then mature it for 2 or 3 years, and then send everyone a little 200ml bottle or a 500ml bottle or something.
That's amazing.
Years in the future.
And then, do you know what? Everyone gets to relive that moment.
That's again. It. And then I have, for the rest of my life, I have bottles of a barrel that I filled on my wedding day. I never have to go out and look for Blanton's dates that specify specifically to these things. Like, I don't have to look for specific vintage Scotch whiskies or anything. Like, it's just there.
I can see Blanton's doing that, or like Buffalo Trace doing that in the future. It's just like
Yeah.
people going in and filling barrels on their wedding day.
Yeah.
That's
well,
bourbon tourism.
Anyway, one day.
But that's a whole nother podcast episode. That is.
Definitely.
But Owen, thank you so much for your time
Thank
this
you.
afternoon. You've been an absolute fucking legend. Do you want to, I guess, we'll plug businesses, we'll plug any tastings that, because I know we'll probably have you here for the American Whiskey Show in Sydney come
I don't
August.
know if I'm around for Sydney in August. I'm back in Kentucky at the beginning of September for KBF.
Yep.
But I should be around, I think, for the whiskey show in the US Whiskey Show in Melbourne in October.
Okay.
Otherwise, we will probably run a tasting around that in Melbourne, probably with Goodwater again, and I'll throw some interesting stuff up. But
I'll come down.
Otherwise, I'm just doing lots and lots of work with the Baxus team over in the States. I'm back and forth from the US 3 or 4 times a year now. So yeah, next big thing for me is KBF, and then I think we'll do some more work, maybe some more barrel picks next year as well. But take a look at Baxus. AWA is where I'm originally from, where I built my stuff as well. Those guys are fantastic, running the best auctions in Australia. And tag me on Facebook if you feel like you need any help with vintage bottles. Reach out to me on Instagram, the Whiskey-O. I'm easy to get access to, and I can help with any old and rare needs.
I love it. Thank you so much again for your time this afternoon, Owen.
No problem.
Definitely appreciate it. I will drop all your socials in the description there as well. But thank you guys for tuning in. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed, and please reach out to myself or Owen for all your whiskey needs. Cheers, legends.
Thank you.